In this video, you are going to learn how to calculate friction. Remember that friction is the force exerted by a surface, in the opposite direction of motion, to resist movement of an object on the surface. There are two types of frictional forces: static friction and kinetic friction. Static friction is the frictional force of one surface on another, when there is no movement. Remember that maximum static friction is the friction that exists just before an object starts moving. This is the formula for maximum static friction. This symbol is the coefficient of static friction, and the N is the normal force acting on the object. So the maximum static friction is equal to the coefficient of static friction, multiplied by the normal force. Kinetic friction is the frictional force of one contact surface on another, when one or both objects are moving. This is the formula for kinetic friction. This symbol is the coefficient of kinetic friction. And this is the normal force. So kinetic friction can be calculated by multiplying the coefficient of kinetic friction by the normal force acting on an object. When calculating friction, it's important to first know the magnitude of the normal force. Remember that the normal force is the force exerted by a surface on an object that is on the surface. And the normal force is always perpendicular to the surface. The normal force will vary, depending on which other forces are also acting on the object. When an object is at rest on a flat horizontal surface, then the normal force is equal to the gravitational force acting on the object. This is because the object is at rest, so there are no other forces acting on the object, so the normal force will balance out gravity. If the object is on a flat surface, and the force is applied at an upwards angle, then the first thing we must do is divide the force applied into its horizontal and vertical components. Then the normal force will be equal to the gravitational force, minus the vertical component of the applied force. This is because the vertical component and the normal force both act upwards, and they balance out gravity. So the vertical component plus the normal force will equal gravity. Therefore, the normal force is equal to gravity minus the vertical component. If the object is on a flat horizontal surface and a force is applied at a downward angle, then first we must draw the horizontal and vertical components. Notice that the arrows are coming towards the box. The normal force will be equal to the gravitational force, plus the vertical component of the applied force. This is because the vertical component and gravity both act downwards, so the normal force must balance them out. Here's an example. A man pulls a 20-kilogram box on a flat horizontal surface with a force of 200 newtons at an upwards angle of 33 degrees, and the box moves. The coefficient of kinetic friction is 0.44. Calculate the frictional force. We are asked to calculate the frictional force, and we are given the coefficient of kinetic friction. So we should already know that we will have to use the kinetic friction formula to calculate friction. We know the coefficient of kinetic friction. So we need to calculate the normal force in order to do this calculation. This is the diagram for the forces acting on the box. Gravitational force is equal to mass times acceleration. Remember that the mass must be in kilograms and the gravitational acceleration is 9.8. Remember that the vertical component is the force multiplied by sine of the angle. And remember that when the applied force is acting upwards, then the normal force is equal to the gravitational force minus the vertical component. So the normal force is 87 newtons. Now we can calculate the kinetic friction. And we find that the kinetic friction is 38.28 newtons.